Welcome to the module on political economy of public finance. Whenever we discuss about the concept of political economy, it is basically the amalgamation of politics and economics taken up together. So in this particular framework of political economy, the discussions are on the role of political institutions and how they perform within the economic ideologies along with the economic policies. Basically, the economic policies, when they are framed, the framing policies and the institutional background are discussed and thereby in turn affect the political outcomes. So in this particular discussion of political economy, the focus will be on the concept of public finance. So public finance basically deals with the allocation of public resources in the arena of government revenue as well as expenditure. So in order to attain the socio-economic goals and also in order to access to the political domain of any country or nation, it is the public finance which is very much relevant. So as far as the historical foundations of public finance is concerned, it is deeply embedded within the political structure of an economy, which is governed not only by the political policies but also with the economic and the non-economic factors. This basically goes back to the ancient civilizations of Roman Empire or Han Dynasty in China, where it was said that how the public goods were given more recognition within the domain of public finance, particularly public infrastructure and national security. Because these public goods are having the properties of non-excludability and non-rivalry. So by non-excludability, we mean that it is impossible to exclude anyone from the consumption of this kind of good because it will be available for all. As well as when we talk about non-rivalry, it means that if anyone consumes the good, then it does not reduce the consumption of the others. So there is no question of enmity in the consumption of the rival good. So as a result of that, public goods are basically taken up for collective consumption, which should provide equal satisfaction to all the consumers and thereby will be concerned about a collective benefit. So in that way, public finance encompasses public infrastructure, health, defense, national security and many other examples which are considered as the pure public good. And in the medieval period, when we talk about the European monarchs, they also have considered public finance or rather allocation of public goods for their military campaigns and also in building up their armaments. So with the 19th century, when there is a concept of a modern state, then this public finance was considered as actually one of the most important tool for economic development and also the provision of the social services. By the social services, we mean the basic amenities of life or the basic education and the health services. So in all, the public finance has been governed to take up all these roles in a developing or in an emerging society. When we look at the public finance from the concept of the governmental effort, we want to emphasize on the relevance of its study. Because within the domain of political economy, how does the public finance fits in? So this basically refers to the crucial role of the government operations. That is how the government basically acquires money and how the government plans out its expenditure mechanism. This is related to the management of public funds and resources. So when we talk about the management of public funds and resources, we refer to the budget that the economy prepares, and based on the budget, the different needs of the economic development are taken care of. So basically, the management of the public funds and its resources are very much important for meeting the needs of the citizens as well as for ensuring the overall economic development. Moreover, we can see that the public finance varies over a range of topics which looks after the taxation policy, looks after the public expenditure policy, as well as public debt, and all these are encompassed within the fiscal policy. So whenever we refer to the political economy or any kind of discussions in this regard, the notion of policy making is important, And here the most relevant policy that needs to be discussed is none other than the fiscal instruments or the fiscal policy. Moreover, we have seen that whenever we concern about the government's role in any society, particularly in a socialistic economy, the most important role at the commanding heights is played by the government sector. And this is the government sector which provides the provision of public goods and services which is necessary for functioning of the society. Moreover, it looks after infrastructure, looks after education, healthcare, defense. All these are considered to be the instruments of the public finance. So as a matter of the fact, it is seen that the public good had taken up the pivotal role whenever we discuss about the public finance and its elements. This also goes back to the question of fund allocation. So public finance should ensure the model in such a way that the government should have sufficient funds to operate. Particularly, they can give the effectiveness of the provision of these goods and services. So that is how the public finance can come up with maximization of social welfare, which looks after the distributional aspect of the total wealth, as well as to promote the economic growth. Here, economic growth considers the holistic growth that the economy wants to attain. Another important role that public finance plays is its role in economic development. So when we look at economic development, we look at investment in infrastructure, we look at investment in education and many other areas that actually requires the notion or the priority basis of an economy. Public finance also is very much important to combat with the externalities. Now, this is a very important concept in the domain of a political economy because any kind of market failure occurs whenever the price mechanism fails to work. For example, when we consider any kind of industrialization or urbanization coming up, then it creates some environmental hazards, like taking up the lands for the real estate or taking up the drainage system, the water irrigation system. Everything gets affected because of such kind of rapid urbanization. So as a matter of fact, the public good is getting affected and thereby we can see that the market fails to perform. So under that situation, the growth and the efficiency parameters can be affected by the proper allocation of resource. So finally, we can see that the relevance of the public finance within the domain of the political economy is based on three important objectives. Firstly, to stabilize the economy, that refers to macroeconomic stabilization, so that the economy can go for a consistent growth rate, economy can have a kind of a decent level of inflation, and more importantly, the economy can resist all kind of political and economic shocks. Resource allocation is very much important to look after the social welfare or the priority sectors of the economy, and finally the distribution of income, which takes care of the equity concept. So in all these effects, we can see that any kind of stabilization policy taken up by the government sector will be to stabilize the aggregate demand, control the inflation, and take up the public finance as the major role. Moreover, we can see that whenever the resource allocation comes in, then it also takes up the political agenda or the political ideologies, so that which sectors are given the top priority within the economic policy making. This can also take care of income distribution, because income distribution will definitely take care of the equity, definitely take care of the distribution of income in a more equitable manner. It is also related with the issues of corruption, which are the issues arising out of the public finance that will be taken up later, like the issues of corruption, issues of public choice, and definitely distributional effects. So this basically takes up how this corruption reshapes the public resources and how it leads to various kind of misallocation of resources by taking away the general interest. So under the proper management policy, it is seen that the provision of the public goods are basically resting on the priority policies of the government, particularly in those areas which requires long-term investment and also addressing the market failures. So the public finance basically encompasses a wide range of topics which leads with the fiscal policy, the debt management, and also it takes care of the income distribution so that economic growth, social welfare and sustainability all are taken care of. So hence it is relevant that within the structure of political economy, the discussions on these subtopics or on these issues are more relevant because they can lead to the desirable outcomes. This basically refers to the major components of the public finance. So as it is seen that the public finance shapes the entire structure of resources, affects the lives of the citizens within the structure of political economy. So in that case, it actually leads to some kind of amalgamation between the politics and economics and how the policymakers are shaping in this regard. This also takes care of the weights that are given to public policies, particularly within the domain of different political structures and how the political stability also gets affected. First component that comes in is one of the most important and actually very relevant in this context is the taxation policy. Because when we look at the taxation policy, it looks into levying taxes on individuals and businesses, and thereby the revenue can be generated by the government. So whenever we talk about the revenue generation or we talk about the levying of the taxes, then this taxation policy takes up a pivotal role. Secondly, we can see that the policymakers are working on several principles of taxation. For example, equity, efficiency, and simplicity. Now, each of these terms is very much important within the domain of our political economy. When we refer to the equity, it basically refers to the concept of taxation which can be done on different slabs so that the progressive taxation actually affects the richer classes, which basically categorizes on the capitalistic form of the society. That is, the capitalist classes who are earning more than the general masses will be taxed more as their income is on the rise. And definitely it will take care of the socialistic pattern so that equitable distribution of resource comes in. So any kind of higher taxation or higher burden of taxation on the richer classes will extract out the extra resources which can be diverted for the promotion of economic welfare. The second word is called efficiency. This efficiency basically refers to the allocation of resources over the different sectors. And this efficiency model is considered one of the most important canons of taxation. Next, we have the simplicity, which means the tax administration should not be complex and should not have multiplicity in the tax rates. This calls for rationalization in the tax structure so that it becomes simple as well as very concise to comprehend. So this is basically considered that the equity comes up from the fact that to earn more should pay more tax, and the efficiency that actually aims that any kind of economic behavior cannot be distorted. For example, any scope of evasion of tax or anywhere there is more burden on one sector at the cost of other, all these issues to be taken up within the canons of taxation. Secondly, we can see that the simplicity refers to mainly understanding the tax structure very easily. For example, the tax administration should be very much clear and streamlining should be done. So any kind of trade-off that is basically taking up a kind of a cost between increasing revenue and promoting high growth should take place. So actually when we look at the level of tax is on the rise, then the work gets discouraged and low taxes leads to insufficient revenue. So this is basically embedded within the political structure where we find out that high tax and low tax are basically compromising with the economic growth. Because a person is burdened with high tax, might not be getting sufficient resources to survive, and if the tax is lowered, then the government will suffer because the revenue generation will be affected. So another important component other than tax within the instrument of this fiscal regime is public expenditure. So when we look at public expenditure, is basically the spending on the goods and services. It may be spending on education, on healthcare, on infrastructure, so in all forms of spending that is considered. So it is against the cost of taxation or borrowing, but the spending must consider a kind of a trade-off that involved in the allocation of public resources. So any kind of public resources which requires a trade-off, the spending policy comes in. So spending policy also is an instrumental variable to take up this decision making. The appropriate level of public spending depends on the economic and the social context. This is also important because when we consider the benefits of the public spending, then we want to know how to finance it. In addition to public expenditure, policymakers must also consider public debt and fiscal policy. Because we have seen that for a longer period of time, public debt is basically the amount of money that is owed to the government, to its creditors, and fiscal policy have to utilize them in such manner. So basically within the context of an economic objective, or within the structure of a political economy, it is seen that controlling inflation, promoting economic growth, and reducing unemployment are the major constraints. So whenever the inflation to be controlled, economic growth to be promoted, unemployment to be reduced, all these are constraints within the expenditure. So basically it is seen that the political economy of the finance highlights on importance of balancing the benefits of public spending against the cost of taxation or borrowing to finance it. Because whenever we are spending a lot, then we are observing that the public debt is on the rise without any kind of compromise on the level of revenue generation. So in all these cases, it is very clear that this kind of trade-off should be affected. Public finance also is an important role of any government functioning. Because whenever the government functions, it not only takes care of the economic parameters, it also takes care of the political structure. So any sort of political structure also is very much related with the functioning of these policies. So political economy also plays an interplay between the different understanding of the policies. Whenever you talk about the informed decisions, or we talk about the economic development, or we talk about the political prerogatives, under all these situations, political economy plays a pivotal role. This brings us to the discussions on the issues that are arising in this context. One of the most important concepts is the discussion on public debt. Because public debt basically makes it clear about the mix of political priorities against the economic priorities. Because public debt originates from the notion of a political propaganda of a given ruling party in any nation. Because this goes back to the investment projections that are done without any fund or any kind of resource required to finance this kind of fund. So as a result of this, the far-reaching implications are two-way, and the political economy makes a balance between the benefits of the borrowing and the cost of servicing the debt. Because benefits of the borrowing is to meet up with the projections that are already done, but financing the debt is basically adding a cost on the obligations of this debt management. So in the short run, public debt can be used to finance public investments. Economic growth can be stimulated, and it can be a safety net during the economic downturns, because we can see that the funds will be generated or there will be added funds, and accordingly the essential services can be taken up. But in the long run, if public debt becomes a routine exercise of the government, then definitely the expenditure will be on the hike, the debt obligations will be adverse, and as a result of that, the burden may shift to the future generations with rise in the cost of borrowing, and the entire economy will not only suffer in the current generation but also in the long run. This basically gives us very clear indications that the government will not be in a good shape in terms of debt service management. So in order to do that, there would be some kind of interventions from both the economic and the political policy makers. So governments can mitigate the negative impacts of public debt by adopting sound debt management policies. So this can be done by prioritizing the debt repayment, directing the productive investment, and generating the long-term benefits. All these are very much crucial. And under this context, the most important crucial policy is the fiscal policy, because it will involve some areas of taxes, spending, and borrowing. More importantly, we can look at the expansionary fiscal policy also, which looks after the reduction of the tax, increase in the expenditures, and also this has come up one of the most important ways to actually stimulate the economy, also to grab some kind of purchasing power in the economy. But the political economy gives us very clear for the trade-off between these two. So basically, when we look at the political economy relevance, we have seen that how these two are taken up in a more judicious manner. When we refer to the fiscal policy and expansionary fiscal policy taken up together, we have seen that suppose an economy is going through a slowdown, then this expansionary fiscal policy will be leading to inflation and thereby making the short-term and the long-term implications to be together. On the other hand, we can see effective public finance also should ensure social welfare maximization. And this goes back to the story of policy making, because this policy making is a very complex and a very multifaceted affair where both the dynamics should be taken into account. So it is seen that an understanding of the principles of taxation, principles of public expenditure, public debt, policies, all are taken care of within the domain of the policy makers. So it is the policy makers who are responsible for making a balance between all these issues. Now we move on to the issues arising out of this public finance. The first important issue arises is the notion of corruption. It is basically a global phenomena that can have severe economic, social and political consequences. And particularly the critical areas of governance gets affected because of this. So what is actually referred to the word of corruption is basically involves the misuse of public funds, resources or authority for personal gain. So whenever there is a discussion on the topic of the corruption, it's basically driven by the private motives, but the objective of a good governance is for the collective benefit or to provide benefit for the masses. So this can occur in various kind of forms, like it can be due to the nepotism, due to the bribery, or any kind of corruption which has enormous or huge in shape. And as a result, they have a significant effect on the economy and the society. So whenever all these indicators of corruption are being coming up, or basically the World Bank also has created an index of corruption, it actually emphasizes on the inefficiency of the government effectiveness. It is the government effectiveness which is coming up in this regard. And thereby the concept of public choice comes in. So whenever we look at another important issue arising within the political economy out of the public finance is none other than the public choice theory. What is that? It is basically a principle of market analysis to the study of public decision making, because it is basically taken up that how the most important role can be played by the politicians, by the bureaucrats or by the voters, and how they can guide on the self-interest model and how they can maximize their own utility. So whenever we look at the role of the bureaucrats or we look at the role of the voters, in most of the cases they are driven by private social maximization, or rather private profit maximization. So this public choice theory should be able to understand what are the motivations and the behavioral pattern of the political actors, what will be their implications on the actions of the society, and how they will be able to take up the policy inefficiencies and finally harmful on the society. Because it has been seen that any such kind of repeated mechanism will make the policy to be ineffective and how the society will be affected out of it. So that goes back to the notion of the public choice theory. This also gives us another important notion regarding the public choice theory is about the issue of the self-interest maximization behavior. And whenever all these things come in, the long-term priorities of the economy needed for overall economic development gets affected. Because all of this political or bureaucratic control look at the short-term gains so that they can avoid any long-term investments. Instead, they favor those kind of policies where they can get the immediate benefits and thereby they can secure their positions. So basically any kind of long-term investment in infrastructure, long-term investment in education is very costly for them, because if they are acting as a dominating role, then definitely they want to invest in those kind of fields where they can get the immediate benefits. Similarly, bureaucrats also can do the same so that they can disrupt their own interest. So it is the public choice theory which says that voters are not always acting in the best interest of the society. Rather than making informed decisions based on the potential benefits and cost of the different policies, voters may be swayed by emotional appeals or political rhetoric. So basically it is seen or it is observed that whenever we look at the dependence on the voters, they might not be true that they will be correctly reflecting the image of the society, or likely they cannot be. In that case, it is the role of the bureaucrats or the politicians which will be taken up in this regard. So most importantly, we can see that in public choice theory, a balancing act should be done by the two important parties. One is on the government side and one is on the economic side. Political economy also can be understood from the lens of public choice theory when we look at the motivations of these politicians in designing and implementing the public policies. Because these motivations are to be clearly understood from the very beginning, and then only we can make a match between the needs and what the policies are up to. So hence it is actually a general thought or a food for thought for the society that there should be some importance of the informed and engaged citizens who should be accountable for all these affairs and should promote policies that benefit the society. And thereby there can be good kind of interactions between the economics and the politics in the public sphere. And that is basically the call for the day. Looking at the issues, now we focus on the distributional effects of the public finance or the public policy making. Because distributional effects are basically important regarding the benefits that can be spread out on all the classes of the society. Firstly, on income distribution, secondly, on wealth distribution, and access to public goods and services. So whenever we consider the role of the interest groups or we look at the role of the investment groups, then we can see how the segments of the society can exert an influence on the policymakers to shape the policies. So basically the society plays an important role because it is a cluster of multiple individuals belonging to different stratum or belonging to different classes. So it is how they can shape the policy and make it a mark. Moreover, it has been seen that the impact on the income and wealth are very much important because this will lead to the resources within the society, how the tax policies will favor the rich, and how this widening wealth gap can take place. Moreover, access to public goods also is a vital aspect of distributional effects because that should not be taken up as a maldistribution or inefficient distribution. So that's why an understanding of the public policy is important before we jump up to the notion of good governance so that both the communities can be taken care of. This brings us to the discussions on the implications of the public policy. The implications of the public policy is absolutely embedded within the political dynamics of a nation, because it is the political dynamics which can make a good mix of the role of the bureaucrats, the role of the dictators, as well as the role of the socialistic pattern in the particular country. Firstly, the importance of designing the fiscal institutions. And this fiscal institution should be in tune with the incentives of the politicians with the long-term fiscal sustainability. Because when we talk about the fiscal sustainability, we mean by a good way of taxation, a good policy of taxation with proper management of the public expenditures that are being done. That there should not be any kind of reckless spending which the government will have to suffer in the near future. So hence, this fiscal institution should be in tune with the political mix. This also leads to the establishment of independent fiscal councils, enacting the binding fiscal rules, and making it to be more transparent and accountable. Secondly, we can also look at the distributional aspect because different groups have different preferences and interests. So where any kind of policy should not harm the others. There is always a kind of a trade-off in the society where any policy is benefiting one class, but it is not actually benefiting the other because it is a cost on the others. So this basically makes a kind of a trade-off between the two. This goes back to the discussion of the cash transfer versus the food subsidy. It is seen that the policy of mobile banking might not be effective in those villages which have very, very low access to electrification, or even their electrification is very poor. So there any kind of mobile banking or subsidy being granted through the bank transfer will not work. So depending upon the situation or the conditions of the citizens of the country, then only the policy should be designed, and thereby in such cases the food rationing is much better or much feasible rather than depending on the cash transfer subsidy. So these are some kind of issues which are taking care of the political dynamics and also taking care of the economic perspectives. Thirdly, it is seen about the public opinion. Because within the public finance, there is a notion of a governance model which calls for voice. So when we look at the voice, we look at the public opinion and the interest groups that are taken up. Because this public opinion is very much important to raise one decision making so that they can participate in the decision making process and the growth becomes more and more inclusive. So this takes care of the awareness or the interest of different groups of the society so that the growth becomes broad-based and inclusive in nature. There also should be transparency in the communications, coordination among the different fiscal policies so that people are trained or educated to understand the fiscal regime. This is also one of the most important drawbacks of any kind of developing nation where most of the dictators actually explain the policies in their own words without reaching the masses. So this requires for any kind of more and more effective way of communicating to the masses in terms of their regional languages and making them understand about the functioning of the economy. Fourthly, the political economy also addresses some challenges like the concept of competitiveness, the challenge of technological innovations which is coming up rapidly, and any kind of international cooperation which should not affect the good governance model, because this also looks into how every individual can be tied up or united in this process. Moreover, they can work together to establish common rules and also standards and avoid any kind of harmful competition. So it has been seen that the political economy of public finance gives a comprehensive outlook on various perspectives of understanding a kind of a complicated interactions between the politics and economics, particularly when we look at the framing, the designing, the implementation, and the evaluation of these policies referring to taxation, spending, and borrowing. And in all these cases, the long-term goals are to be taken care of, like sustainability, welfare, public policies, and the policy makers. So in conclusion, the module on the political economy of public finance basically refers to the intersections of the two important dimensions. One is the dimension of politics, another is the dimension of economics. And this intervention or these intersections should take care of the designing policy, which is very much important at the very initial stage, because the designing should take care of the needs of all people in the society. Then comes the implementation, and after that the auditing practices, that is the evaluation mechanism. And thereby we can refer to the major policies like taxation, borrowing, and expenditure. This also highlights on the role of political institutions, interest groups, and also sharing of public opinion. This is referring to the voice and accountability within a good governance. And another very much important is the impact of the institutional design of fiscal outcomes. This impact refers to how the entire benefits are transmitted to every corner of the nation, where one society should not pay the cost of the benefit which is enjoyed to the other. So hence, political economy of public finance is taking an holistic, comprehensive view on the perspectives of economics and politics for a sustainable long-term growth.